Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first podcast, Connections podcast. Um, the mission for this podcast is very simple. We feel that a lot of people in our society sort of lack self belief, and we want to be a part of helping people figure out what self belief is all about. And so, my name is Otaniyein, and I'm a personal trainer. I've been a personal trainer for 20 years. And this is Karl Daly. Karl, do you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Cheers, Otaniyein. Yeah, my name's Karl Daly. I'm a psychologist by background, 20 years, working similarly in terms of time frame to Otaniyein. So, yeah, work as an organizational psychologist, that's what they call it. But I'm quite interested in the areas of motivation and mindset in particular. And I think that's what's brought us here today to chat about that. And particularly, we're going to talk a lot about self-belief in relation to fitness, but also life in general. But yeah, that's my background.
Awesome. So obviously this is episode number one. So you guys know nothing about us. So I suppose it's worthwhile discussing how we've come to work together in this sort of capacity. So like I said, I've been a trainer for about 20 years, and I actually trained Carl about 8 years ago now, sort of thing. And interestingly enough, when we met, Carl he planted a seed in my mind in terms of he kind of conveyed to me that he thought I had quite a natural instinct for how psychology works in the way I framed how I kind of speak to people about self-talk and visualizing their goals and this kind of stuff. So as a personal trainer, I'm always trying to figure out the best way to get my clients the best results. And I kind of realized that a lot of people, their self-talk is off. The way they kind of tell their self-talk stories is kind of off. So I contemplated going and studying psychology, and while I was thinking about studying, I was thinking, okay, look, one thing I'm going to have to spend maybe 4 or 5 years studying psychology, and then I'm going to have to gain experience before I'm actually helpful to people. So I decided, why not collaborate with Carl, because Carl planted the seed in the first place. So it makes sense to kind of go, okay, if me and Carl work together to help people figure out this self-talk, these stories that people tell to themselves about themselves, we're more likely to get really, really good results. So like I say, sports psychologists or athletes use sports psychologists all the time to get them exceptional results and get them to the next level of where they need to be. So it's not something that's used all the time, but when our brains go there, then our bodies go there straight afterwards. So again, this is what Carl was able to kind of frame for us and get us into the right frame of mind, if that makes sense. Yeah? What do you think, Carl?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think back to that. It's probably even more than 8 years ago. I'd say Italian at
Yeah.
this point. Sad to say, but no, that struck me actually. It was interesting, just that. And I mean, I think this will be a theme of what we talk about is kind of cutting through a lot of the crap, quite frankly, that's out there, both in terms of like, so often the language of psychology is very, cloak and daggers and this type of mystique behind it, but a lot of it's quite straightforward. I remember someone once saying, ex-colleague of mine saying, psychology is a language for things we already know, which I've always liked. And I remember very much so that session and the way, we didn't barrel straight into like, okay, doing sets of this, sets of that, which obviously we were doing, but you were more talking about, even look around this gym, look at the different, approaches that are being taken here. When we come in, the mindset we need to have is this, and exactly to your point, that's what struck me. I was like, wow, this guy's talking as much around my mental game as much as my physical game. And yeah, I think I just threw that out kind of, in the moment.
Yeah.
And as you say, that kind of planted a bit of a seed, unbeknownst to me until we kind of reconnected.
Yeah, it's really funny what the things that stick in your mind, because like I said, it's how I know training works is when I'm focused mentally and I'm really sort of visualizing why I'm doing what I'm doing, how I'm connecting with my body. That's kind of what gets my body where I need it to be. So when we speak about the mindset required, and then obviously I've been working with people for quite a long time, and I go, okay, it's like I could almost read people's minds. That sometimes people will drift off to their work sort of meeting, the next sort of appointment. It's not really being present. And a phrase I like to use all the time is your body worthy of your full attention? So once we're in the gym, you can't be anywhere else. You've got to give your body the respect it deserves. Obviously, that's how you don't get injured. That's how you obviously make your session as effective as possible. So learning how to be that way is what this is about. So I suppose the next part of obviously what we want to kind of get across with why we've kind of made this podcast is we've actually written a book, right? So the book's sort of main focus is the mind drives the results you want. So if you're trying to gain this amazing body that you've dreamed of and you want to achieve it, you have to be in the right frame of mind for that to happen. So I suppose the simplicity of this is training is hard, right? So a lot of trainers or a lot of influencers like to tell people training is easy, everyone can do it, this and the other. But the reality is it is hard, right? So how you build self-belief is knowing this task is going to be hard, but believing you can achieve it. And then when you have a plan and you follow through on your plan, that solidifies your self-belief. It solidifies your confidence. So this is the kind of topics we explore in the book. We wanted to explore how your mind drives your results, how it drives your vision. And if you kind of once you sort of really start to explore what your mind is capable of, then your body just follows. Your body follows where your mind has been, basically.
Yeah, I like the phrase you use about, as you said, when you train, sometimes being connected to your body, and that concept of being truly present. And as we know, there's more distractions than ever. Before, it was one thing years ago to go in, but now obviously everyone's on their smartphones and various things like that, which is, that's fair enough. That's just the way it is today. But I remember one of the things you saying to me actually when we had that first session, was like, I think it was something even like, not that you were critiquing people per se, but you were saying that probably about 50%, if we just look around, of the people in this gym right now are not really doing anything truly effective in relation to training. They're either distracted or they're kind of ego lifting or there's something else going on. But in terms of actually improving your fitness or your body or your health or your longevity, there's almost to some degree no point doing it, because it's, if you're not coming in with the right frame of mind or your training's not right, or your head's not right, you're not going to get the results you really want. And that was kind of reassuring to me in one way, because I felt like, okay, sometimes you get distracted yourself to say, oh, look at these, people over there, they clearly must know what they're doing. It's like, not necessarily, because they're just they're not present. So so that definitely has always kind of stayed with me and been a really helpful point. And as we'll come on to talking about, I think this idea, of whether it be mindful training, whatever you want, it's a bit of a hackneyed phrase now, being the mindfulness stuff, but still I think it's relevant to this, of actually when you get in there, you were truly focused. And I think that's where if people want genuine results, I think that's what our experience has showed us, particularly from yourself, Otaniyein, is critical.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting actually, because I joined a new gym recently. I go there with my wife all the time, and it's like I'm not without sort of like trying to pick at gyms and call out names and stuff, but even sort of high end gyms, you kind of notice that the gyms are just interested in membership. They're not interested in people actually getting the results they want. And kind of what strikes me is conveying to the members that you can't get results without intensity, right? So the intensity is going to be driven by how present you are with your body and how much you've actually kind of explored why you're in the gym in the first place. So again, this is kind of the topics we discuss in the book, is figuring out how to kind of tap into your deep why. Why are you in the gym? Why is training so important to you? So if you never explore these thoughts, or you never really think, okay, this is more of a mind game than a physical game, then then that kind of changes the game for you, really, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of what we've come to the conclusion of, is most people think training is more physical than mental. But then now when you start to really explore that, actually, what am I thinking when I'm in the gym? What's actually going through my mind? Am I actually trying to understand my body better? Am I trying to get a stronger connection with my body? And again, this is the reason why we've called this podcast Connections. Is this is what the training's all about? It's about connecting mind and body. So when the mind is connected to the body well, even like the ideas of just coordination. So if you haven't got strong coordination with your body, you can't train the body very well. So the better connected you are, the more you think about your whole journey is about a stronger connection between your mind and body, the more likely you are to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve in the gym, or just in life in general, in any kind of endeavor, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
And it was interesting, like a lot of the topics or the curiosity I had, having just seen this within my own circle of either friends or colleagues or whatever. And I asked you about it, Tanya, is how common is it for people to, have these big bursts of, I'm going to the gym and getting fit, it's March, April, summer's coming up, I need to now, hit the gym and get whatever, for whatever reasons, and, everyone has their different reasons, often probably more aesthetic. I've got my body in toned and all this kind of stuff, and that's where there's probably the attraction of these fad diets and fad workout routines. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is often I said is the short termism around some of that, and again, I'm not an expert when it comes to that type of physiology stuff, and I'm sure there's things you can do. From what I understand and what you've been educating me around is some of that, one, is not that healthy often.
yeah,
In terms of how you do that. And second of all, what we're more interested in personally is sustainable results and ability to be like, well, I'm not going to now, it comes to like this time of the year as we record this September, I've been in my holidays and now I kind of just start packing on the weight again and I
yeah,
lose motivation. We're more interested, as Otaniyein said, is like, well, what are the mechanisms that we can tap into that create a ongoing, cadence of and relationship with fitness and exercise and health, and have a more holistic view on that. And I'm a bit loath to even use that word holistic. I know people can interpret that in different ways, but as you said, Tanya, it's more about just that connection. Those areas working together, from what we see, leads to not only just more successful outcomes, but more long-term and ongoing outcomes. And that's more, when we talk about this, and when we really started writing the book, and then as we've written the book, I think what's been great is that our values around this stuff have come out clearly, and we're so aligned on that, in that, we genuinely, we'll also through the course of these podcasts very much talk about what we don't know, of which there's a lot. We're just leaning into what we've seen work,
yeah.
what we know in our collective 40 years of in our respective areas. But there's areas where we can say, okay, well, there's experts out there who can talk better on certain topics. So we just want to talk about what we know. But that's the key, North Star for us in terms of what we feel is important, and what, through our humble lessons in life, we want to share with people, that if it gives people a perspective to say, actually, that's going to help me. We're in our 40s now, Otaniyein and I, but, we would think about this 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and beyond. And I think that's where we feel we want to hopefully add some value.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's like you just said there. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to sound like an old man. I don't know, I feel like I'm getting older. Obviously, I'm 44, but it's like we can't be surface level. And when we're surface level with training, this is when we everyone kind of falls short. Is you've got to think, and I would say this to a lot of my clients, that everything a lot of people do at the moment is they think in terms of days and weeks rather than years and decades, right? So if you're a long-term, big picture thinker, you're more likely to succeed in this, right? So you've got to kind of you've got to be really invested in a long game with this, and then the better you are at doing that, and you kind of believe in that as this is the only way to kind of approach this. This is again, this is what the book's about. The book is about figuring out your forever why. I suppose it is what we discussed before. It is, how does this impact how you play with your kids? How does it impact how you show up with your partner? So like for me, for example, I say this to you all the time. The thing is, it's really funny. We've been working this book for a while and figuring out what we're going to do next in terms of, I don't know, how we're going to publish it and if there's even interest in it. And this is obviously why we've kind of done this podcast. But it's like we want people to understand that if you can't go long term with this, then it doesn't really work because it doesn't stick. So what we've discussed before with this is, I know I won't ever be out of shape because I'm always going to think it's important to stay attractive for my wife. Right? I'm always going to think it's important for my daughter to see an example of someone in shape, because when we've discussed this before, is kids don't just learn from what you tell them; they learn from what they see. They learn from the examples that we set for them. So we've discussed this as obviously as a father, and you as an uncle to a niece and nephew, that we want our family to see good examples of good health, and they learn from this. So these are the kind of topics we're going to be discussing in future podcasts. Is how do you solidify your permanent why, your forever why, basically. And this is what we're kind of about with how we build self-belief, how we build sort of I suppose self-awareness and self-control. These are topics that we're gonna keep on trying to cover going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that kind of your forever why phrase. It's something you just coined that now, Tanyan. So, it's not
I
going
mean,
to like that. So it's good. This is why I haven't published the book yet. You're always giving that needs to go in. We only heard that today.
or tinker with it,
Yeah,
still.
it's good.
It's still got time.
But I mean, it's an important thing you mentioned because on a couple of fronts. Because one is obviously everyone's forever why is going to look different. That's because it's the rich tapestry of humanity and who we all are, and diversity and stuff like that, which is amazing. And then the other thing I think where sometimes, and I see this, relative to lots of different things in terms of life goals, whether it be fitness or other things, is when and you can have both, of course. You can have I've got a short term goal, but often if that's linked to the longer term piece, you're a lot more likely to do something about it often. But sometimes when you only have the short term goal, there's a risk that what can happen is even if you achieve that and you get it and you're like, great, done. After that, there can be a sense of drop off,
Right.
because then it feels like, well, what now? And yeah, okay, maybe I need to think of other goals and things like that. But you do see patterns of people kind of hitting kind of, peaks and troughs in terms of motivation, and then trying to build that back up. And that's where you often can see, that lack of consistency in whatever that is, because it just feels like, and again, use the example of someone, I want to get fit for summer. Okay, that's my goal. Boom, did it, whatever you needed to do. And then it's the end of summer and you kind of go, now I have no motivation necessarily to keep going to the gym. And that just falls off a cliff. And that's not what, again, we're talking about here. Maybe there's thinkers and trainers out there who will help you with that. That's not our bag, and no critique there. Fine. If that's what you're looking for, all good. We're into, as Otaniyein said, the longer term game. And part of that is you will still make short term goals. Part of, and we'll talk about this in other podcasts of, when you set yourself this kind of find your forever why and articulate that in some way and then think long term. Well, there's loads of milestones that will get you there. And some of those are short term things that are going to give you a massive buzz and a massive lift. But our view is that framed within a broader why and sense of purpose is what really, not only makes those short-term gains even more enjoyable, but even when you kind of transition out of that, you're still focused on that kind of bigger win, an ongoing win.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I say. I mean, without sounding too Instagram your on a podcast, it's kind of one of those things where you have to find joy in the process. You have to. The more you understand, I suppose it's for me. Is as you start to figure stuff out, as you start to understand how your body works better, how the technique works better, how you engage certain areas of your mind and your body, and you go, okay, I wasn't thinking that way before, and now I am. This is going to give you some level of joy. And again, sometimes the progress is not always physical, but it's the mental, that I understand something better that I didn't before. And then it's literally getting excited by the process. And the more you understand the process, all your efforts become a lot more lasered in. They become a lot more impactful, because what it means you can, don't want to use the word attack, but you can really engage the body a lot more strongly, because your understanding of the information is stronger. and that means your efforts are gonna, I don't know, be more lasered in. So this is super important. It's just to kind of really, really lean into understanding the process and getting joy just from understanding the process of things, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I don't know. This is certainly not my line, and I can't remember where I read it or heard it, but someone said something around there's this concept of fall in love with the process,
Mm,
and that still sticks with me for a number of reasons. Like on my own personal, we all have our own lives and learnings and personal journeys. That sounds a bit cheesy as well, but a big thing I've learned and still have to manage within myself is to not try and be so focused on an outcome that you lose sight of actually the process of getting there.
mm,
And actually, certainly in my experiences as myself, and Otaniyein, you helped me with this even on the fitness side of you're thinking, I want this. That's the thing I want to achieve, right? And I think there's
yeah,
a difference between setting a goal and trying to control an outcome, because
yeah,
then I think you're trying to skip steps, or you're trying
yeah,
to get a quick win. And I think unfortunately there are things out there that we would, no names, but we would be of the view of that is the opposite of what we stand for, because that is not actually a healthy way of actually achieving goals. But back to your point, being able to think about the process and understand that and kind of appreciate that, the outcomes look after themselves.
I
And
like that.
and
Yeah,
and that's a big learning I've had to go through to stay.
yeah,
And that's back to what's the word you said earlier on, being present. When you're
yeah,
present, you're focused on the process. You're focused on, when we talk about training right, doing the right reps, being present in the gym, being focused. Then all of a sudden you'll say, like, oh, damn, these outcomes I'm getting the thing that I wanted now, but I'm not
mm,
trying to control an outcome. And as I say, that's not saying you don't set goals. You do, of course, do all that stuff, and we'll talk about that another time. But really, we're trying to say, what's the, not even just the process, the bit before that, before you actually enter the process. And we think there's a lot of magic happens there.
yep. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yes, Carl. I mean, the thing is, I love that because at the end of the day, it is how training works. I was using this phrase a client of mine today, and he really said he really liked it because again, I'm always trying to figure out how to make things just get it across to people where they can really understand it and get us on the same page. Because there's no point it all being in my head and I don't get it across to my clients. So one of the things I kind of mentioned to him is this idea of marking a muscle. So the muscles you're training, you've got to think about your marking the area, right? You mark that area and then you feed your body and then you nourish the body. So essentially what we're trying to get really good at is understanding which areas we've marked, how to really mark that area. So if you're squatting, for example, you're hitting your quads, you're hitting your hamstrings, you're hitting your glutes, you're hitting your core. But you know if you define marking the area by, okay, I'm going to go through full eccentric of the exercise. I'm going to go, okay, full range of motion, and I'm going to make sure I push the exercise to kind of near failure. But because you've done that part and then you've nourished the body and you've rested the body, the results just take care of themselves. It's like what you just said. Everything just takes care of itself because all you're focused on is getting really, really good. It's getting really, really good at marking the area, really, really getting good at understanding how this works. And because you just focus on that and you do that every single time you go into the gym, you just focus on getting better, the results, they just take care of themselves because it's kind of inevitable, really. That's what's going to happen because everything is just getting a little bit more focused. So you haven't focused on the end, you just focus on getting good every single time you go in. And yeah, it just takes care of itself.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So yeah, and I mean, we're kind of conscious of not to jump ahead. There's loads of elements of what we're. This is an introductory session. Obviously it's our first
Yeah,
podcast, as you say, Italian. But as we work through these, what we want to do is kind of unpack some of these concepts in a little bit more detail,
yeah,
and look at the different aspects of, like, well, what does that look like? What does falling in love with the process look like? How do you stay present? How do we set goals in a way that is not controlling an outcome but still has that kind of clear goal and forever why? So again, this is just kind of an introductory session, but I think that these are definitely areas where we're always keen to talk about and unpack. So I'm almost kind of holding myself back from some of the specifics around these, but
Interestingly, just talking about sort of like future podcasts. I mean, I suppose we discussed this just before we got on. Is just the idea that part of what we're going to discuss is this growth mindset in the book. It's kind of one of the top topics we discuss. And this, literally, this podcast is an example of us living growth mindset, because we accept that this podcast might be a little bit shit, right? And we believe that if we keep on doing it, we're going to get better. We're going to bring more value to you guys, and we're going to help you figure this part out. Because, like I said, the stories that people tell themselves and the way people kind of frame it mentally is something that if you dive into, there's a lot of value there. There's a lot to kind of like there's a lot to gain from approaching it from this perspective. So yeah, this podcast might be a little bit all over the place. Again, I am not a tech savvy guy. I'm again 44. I'm not into being a wizard on the internet. But what we're saying is very valuable, and we stand by it. We stand by what we're about.
Yeah, totally, and that's absolutely true. We stand by, and as I say, we're not saying we're the foremost experts in a lot of the areas, but we just want to share and what we've learned as we discussed. And yeah, the growth mindset stuff for sure. Otaniyein, as you say, that's for people who are familiar with that phrase. I think coined by Dr. Karl Dweck, and it's just that idea. I mean, again, as you say, Otaniyein, we're kind of throwing ourselves out there, and if this is a bit rubbish, well, okay, we'll take that and we'll learn from it and try and move forward. And
Ah,
that's part of the ethos of what we want to talk about as well, is that actually if you can go into this with an open mind and say, I'm willing to give it a go, but I'm really going to focus on that, and yeah, okay, that didn't quite work, but how can I learn and keep learning, and it's again thinking about that long-term path. This is not a race, it's a marathon, in many ways, about how to get there, but it's about mindset, and I think that's a big thing we'll tap into, is
mm,
what is the mindset around doing this. And actually, kind of, it brings me back to how you opened up a little bit, Otaniyein, around talking about purpose and self belief and the forever why. And some of these things people might say, "Oh, that sounds all very nice and kind of fluffy and things like that." But this is literally about how the neurology of our brains work. In terms of a lot of the research in terms of motivation, extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation. One being kind of factors that influences from the outside, which might
yeah.
be a lot of, and I think a lot of training and fitness often falls into now these days in that category. I've seen stuff on Instagram. I've watched a movie. I've this. I have to look like that, which is not necessarily wrong with if that's kind of getting you up and kind of getting you energized. And I think a lot of people have always talked, even you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think he had posters of Hercules from the 50s or something like that. So that
Yeah, I
got
remember.
him moving. But
Yeah.
what was important, even his example, was the intrinsic motivation. So that's where we're going to lean into a lot, which is what are the things within us that is
Yeah.
inherently satisfying and gives us joy and energy and ongoing motivation, and being able to tap into that as well is what really helps sustain things, because the extrinsic stuff can only, certainly from my experience, it's a great starter. It's a great thing to kind of get you up off the couch, whatever else. But the thing to sustain that is this intrinsic why. Why am I doing this? What's important for me?
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we're particularly going to kind of tap into, because we feel, I guess, the extrinsic stuff is pretty much out there to a large degree. Some of it's become a little bit toxic and unhealthy, from
Mm,
what we see, and it's almost bordering on shaming, which we're not into. But we were just like, what's that thing? And Tanya nicely shared some of his intrinsic motivators. So what we want to talk about a little bit is how do we find them for ourselves, but as importantly, and I think you mentioned earlier on, Tanya, the phrase like the self-talk. How is
yeah.
that self-talk reinforcing that, or reminding us of that,
Yeah.
even those days where we're busy, our head's not there, we're feeling low energy, things like that. That's the thing that can often power us through. So that's just I think something to touch on, because it's going to be a bit of a thread of a lot of the content we're going to share.
Interesting enough, just off the back of what you're saying about sort of intrinsic motivation, a discussion I was having with my wife that we both, well, she literally dismissed it. I thought it's quite interesting. I wanted to sort of bring it to you in this in our meeting today. Is it possible? Or I believe it is, but is it possible to have a sense of immense joy and accomplishment and satisfaction from a vision that you're going to achieve this amazing goal. I mean, I suppose this was going to be the main topic of our podcast today. But I suppose the reason why I kind of have this in my mind because I know, like I say, how my mind works with training, and I'm always trying to bring my clients on to the correct mindset so they can kind of gain good results and good sort of benefits from their training. But I suppose intensity is what's required to train, and intensity, however you want to frame it, is quite uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? So you have to learn how to lean into the discomfort. And part of the way I lean into discomfort is I'm able to visualize or get a sense of immense joy from what's on the other side of that discomfort. And again, that's very much an internal conversation, is an internal chat. So the question is, can you gain an immense feeling of joy from a vision, or what's the science behind that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, and I think that conscious of your discussion with your wife as well. I don't want to dismiss one side or the other, but I think you can personally.
Mm,
I think, and I understand the counterpoint is like, well, which I'm interpreting as how can you get that joy and energy from just the vision rather than the outcome.
that's actually
The
achieving it. Yeah,
outcome is the thing, which makes sense. But
yeah.
actually, this comes back to falling in love with the process a little bit. I think that
Okay.
I think the missing piece, which is very common, is that it's like we talked earlier on about. I think if you're delivering a goal, a short term goal or outcome, isolated from a bigger sense of purpose, then
Mm,
the only thing very often, from my experience, is the achievement of that goal is what brings the
right.
joy because
Yeah.
everything just moves towards that. It's short term. I just need to get there. Whereas if
Mm,
it's framed and you have been able to tap into the forever why, the bigger purpose, the thing that gets you really truly engaged and energized,
fired up. Yeah.
then I think there is a sense of joy that comes from I'm actually going in. I am going somewhere today to help facilitate me achieving my bigger why.
Mm,
And that's an exciting thing, and you excuse the kind of analogy here. I play golf, so some people might say, you big whatever. But Tiger Woods, who's probably the greatest of all time, his big thing was he loved practicing.
okay.
Now, he loved the game day, he loved the intensity of that, he intimidated people, but he loved practicing.
Right.
And what he got joy from that.
Mm,
And that's what often differentiated him because, I mean, I can't obviously speak for him, but my understanding, and I've read his book and various other books, is that because he was able to take joy from that,
mm,
that when it actually came to the day to actually do, the big stage stuff,
easy.
it was the outcome was, he wasn't trying to control that outcome. He was just like, I know what I need to do because I
Right.
this whole process for me is joyful or energizing. So I think in a lot of cases, actually you can do that
Yeah.
and achieve that. And again, I think that for me anyway, the missing piece is that upfront. Even before you go in and you talk about, you're able to tap into this is my why and kind of just that kind of I guess boosts you. And I know we've talked about this a lot in the past. So I think one thing. I think as we go through the other episodes of this, we're going to get more specific into some of these areas. And I think like what we'd like to do is share some thoughts as well
Yeah.
around, well, actually, if we're talking about this, what might be something that we might share as a reflection, as a thing to try out. And being
Mm,
conscious today is we're kind of still at the high level of what we're talking about. But I think if I was to say anything and be interested in your thoughts, Tanya, and how we kind of leave just a thought out there
mm,
is if you're going training, if you're going to the gym, is it a transactional experience? Is it a am I just going because I should be going, which is again more of an extrinsic motivator, and you could say this. Then you can get into detail of like, is that a positive or negative? Because that's almost like if I often hear when I'm doing coaching or sessions, I should do this, I have to do this. I always think, that not necessarily a red flag, but it's a I should and I have to.
yeah.
Whereas
Where's that should come from? Yeah.
Exactly. Where's that should coming from? Because that's not an intrinsic thing typically. It's typically
Mm.
something that because, society tells me I have to, and this. Sometimes that can be good, because if a doctor says, it's good to exercise, you should be getting exercise, that's still, an important message and relevant. But if you're able to say, well, why am I doing this? And let me just stop for a second and remind myself, just for a few minutes, why am I
Mm.
doing this for me? And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of a selfish point of view. Otaniyein, you gave the example of your daughter, So,
Yeah.
but I mean from within me, what's important that for me of why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And I find often when people can kind of just bring that back into view, you kind of go, yeah, actually, I'm doing this for a real reason. That's important to me.
Yeah.
And that can just kind of say, I'm actually, it might just mean you bring a bit of extra energy, even 1%, 2%. You're more focused when you get in there. Just to your point, Tanya, you feel more joy kind of going in because you're like, I'm not doing this because someone's forcing me to do it. I'm doing it because I know there's a bigger reason and a bigger why behind it.
I think it's interesting as well what you're saying there because it doesn't have to be one thing. You can find a few things because I think it's interesting. We've discussed this before. Just because you like training doesn't mean you always want to go and train, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have several methods because I mean, if we talked about this before, so at the end of the day, exercise literally as a concept is kind of bullshit. Like it's like you have to go and do this really really hard thing a couple of times a week because it's good for your health. It's just hard, right? So we're all human. We don't. No one wants to do a hard thing. No one wants to do these uncomfortable things. But you've got to figure out for yourself why it's important. So if you have a few different whys that kind of
Yeah.
make you go and do the things you don't necessarily want to do. Some days you're going to want to do them more than others, but the days you don't want to do them, if you've got like this underlining, overarching big reason why you do it, you're more likely to go and do it. So if you've explored this mentally, you kind of, I suppose, even something that's been coming to me more recently is there's an emotional draw, and your mind is going to do that to you. So what you think makes you feel a certain way. So the more you kind of are able to kind of get into this way of talking to yourself and convincing yourself and understanding emotionally from why you're doing what you're doing, you're more likely to keep on doing it. But then like if you never think that way, again, it's always external. It's always, oh, I should, and it always feels like a chore. It's always
Yeah.
going to feel like someone's making you do it, that you don't actually want to do it. But if you can personalize, you can internalize why you do it, you're more likely to keep on doing it for a long period of time. And that's what makes it sustainable, is when you've done that, when you've done that work mentally, you know?
100%. Yeah. So, so I don't know about you, Tanya. That feels like a probably sensible place to pause because I think now we'd almost be tipping into well, let's what are specifics we can do around that. But
Yeah,
I think always enjoyable anyway chatting because this is what got us to where we are. Because like we could
yeah,
chat all day, Tanya and I, about these topics. So that's where at one point we said maybe we should funnel this into something because maybe there's some value there. We hope there is. But
yeah.
what are your thoughts, Tanya, on what we might cover next time?
Um, we've got so much in the book to kind of discuss. I think the next part because I'm trying to think about the flow of the book and where we start kind of started. I suppose if we flow into, I suppose self talk is a good one to kind
Yep.
of go straight into the next one. Is just the different things you can say to yourself. I suppose that flows nicely into mindset, mind traps, and drivers. So
Yep.
maybe we cover that on the next one. So do you have maybe a tip to share of how we could kind of walk into the next session from a psychological standpoint of a good way to kind of approach your next gym session maybe
Yeah,
as
I
a way to
think I
finish it.
think I'd probably just bring it back at this stage to next time you're going into a session, just take a moment, and it doesn't need to be a long time, but it could be just a couple of minutes. Is why are you going to the gym? And I know it seems like an odd question. You're like, well, I'm going to be fit, and I was like, no, try and go a little deeper. Like, why are you going to the gym, and whose agenda is it? And
Mm,
that might become clear. It may not, and that's fine if it doesn't, because we want to also share some other maybe ways to get into that. Because I think to be fair, and I've been there. A lot of things I've had to do some work to figure out, well, I actually don't know, Mike, why. Is that bad? No, not at all.
Yeah.
So we'll unpack that further. But it's just a first chance to kind of be present and think about that. And as you said, Tanya, I think then we'll kind of move into self-talk, which is linked but also slightly different because that's more what's happening in terms of our inner monologue. So yeah, I would just encourage people to say, what is the real reason? And to get fit, to train is not really, that's the surface reason. To use
Yeah.
your language, Italian. Why are you going there? What is it you want to achieve,
Indeed.
in a kind of broader sense? And I would say just have a little reflection on that.
Like that. Awesome. I mean, like I say now, it's like we said, this is the first one, right? So we're not expecting to like knock this out of the park immediately. But again, this is another subject we're going to talk about maybe down the line. Is this growth mindset? The growth mindset is the fixed mindset is you think you're never going to get better at something, and the growth mindset is you're going to figure it out. No one starts off good at anything. So this is where we are, and again, we know 100% we have a lot of value to bring to you guys. So stick around and we'll bring more value. We'll kind of help you kind of unlock just kind of I suppose to kind of sum this up is people don't tell us enough how amazing we all are, what we're truly capable of doing. But then if we believe that we are capable of doing amazing things, then we do it. But then this is kind of what we want from this podcast is we want to kind of get across to you guys that you are all capable of doing amazing things. But you have to believe in yourself. You have to figure out the best strategy to get yourself in that frame of mind. And that's how you want to probably finish this, I
Yeah,
think.
well said.
So goodbye from me, Otaniyein Kiyomado, and goodbye from Carl Daly.
Until the next time, folks.
To the next time, guys. Thank you.